Sweet deal. All right. So just as a quick refresher on where we are on this project, we have a page for different products where the CSS is a little bit messed up. And we have, in theory, we would be able to click on these and open up a page that just shows like the image and the name of the product. We couldn't quite get that working a couple weeks ago, so this is unfinished. We'll pretend for a second that that is not implemented, and maybe we can come back to it later. Other things, we added some routing 2 weeks ago, so now we can go between different pages in our application. It's not just a single page for your application. And then other things we did a little bit of CSS styling last week and talked about different ways that you can structure CSS. Is that a question? Okay. I'm gonna take that as a no. If there are questions, feel free to interject at any time. All right. So with that, I'm going to return us to something we had been working on a couple weeks ago, and we made sort of like a small little implementation for, but I never put it into our main branch. It would be really cool to be able to take these products and add them to a cart. So my cart is all of the things that I know I want to buy, and I can hit a little button and it'll store that for me so I can come back to it later. And eventually, once I'm ready, everything's in my cart. I can go into my cart. It'll pull up a new page that just shows the items in my cart, and I can do stuff with them. I can check out any such thing. And if we think about this a little bit, what kind of stuff would we be interested in doing to this cart? So let's pretend that we have just like an array here. So this is my cart, which is an array of products. And this is just sort of like a pseudo type annotation to say that the type of this variable is an array of products. And we need to define some actions for this cart. So one such action might be, well, I need to be able to get all the items in my cart. Which would return to me all of the products in this array. What other actions would be helpful to have for a cart that we might be interested in using in different places on our page? Any thoughts there?
Removing items if a person decided that they didn't want something anymore.
Yeah, that's a great one. We need to be able to remove an item. We might want to do this from like our checkout page or from like a cart preview page. So like if I go on to Target, I have my cart up here. Okay, and this takes me to like a whole page where I can see all the stuff I have in here. I guess I have a banana in here. I don't really know why I have a banana in here. But if I decided I didn't want the banana, I could hit on the X and it's out of my cart. I was thinking more along the lines of like maybe you hit this and there's like a little pop-up in the corner where you can click some buttons. But in either place, we'll probably make it a whole page just because that's what we know how to do at this point. But yeah, totally with you. We need to be able to remove an item from your ready or cart display page. Similarly, what's the opposite of this? We need to also be able to add an item to our cart. And probably I would want to do this from my table here. So maybe we have a little button that just adds it into our cart. And then we have a little icon up here that shows how many things we have in our cart. Any other actions that might be helpful?
I guess selecting how many of each item you want in your cart.
Yeah, we do need to be able to like figure out how many things, how many instances of each product. So maybe I increase the quantity and say, well, I have an item in there. I currently have 2 in my cart, but I want to add 3. That's a great option. And that's not even something I was remembering, but we definitely need that. Increase or decrease quantity of an item. Cool. Other thing I'll mention here, maybe we want to be able to clear all items from our cart. You know, so we don't have to hit like the X button on each individual product or something like that. Cool. I like where this is going. So if we think about this, based on our current knowledge of sort of passing state around our application, and we know that we need to be able to add an item to our cart from this page, and maybe in our homepage, we want to like display how many items there are. In our nav bar up here, we have that little icon that shows you have 3 items in your cart. And maybe I have a new page that we haven't designed yet that's just /cart. And then in here, it just shows me all the items that I have. And I have like a checkout button down here and I can change the quantity. That means that I have to have access to this cart and all of those methods on a lot of different pages. On my products page, in my nav bar, in my homepage, basically anywhere. And one thing that's really annoying about React is that if we were to do this, we would need to make sure that our data is available at the topmost element that needs it. So I would need to say, well, all of my pages are inside of this router provider here. So I probably would need to like create an additional component to then put my router provider into cart component. And then I would need to probably go into this component and create a piece of state. So my piece of state would be this array of products. And then I need to pass it all the way down my tree of components. So into the pages, into the components inside of those pages that actually need to use my cart. That's a little annoying. If we have a really big application, that could be a really long tree of components to get to the place where it's actually needed. Maybe like this page has another page in it, and then that page has a table, and then that table has like a row, and then inside of that row is where we put that button to add a new product. That's really annoying. We have to pass it a long way, so we have to like add that property into several different components. And then it gets even worse when now we have all these actions associated with this that also have to get passed around. I have to know, well, my cart or my homepage needs access to getting all the items. So I need to pass this action into that component. And then my products table, it doesn't need to be able to get all the items in the cart, but it does need to be able to add an item or to increase or decrease quantity. And so I'm going to pass those actions instead. And so we'd have to like create a lot of different handler functions in this cart component and then pass those all the way down our tree to the right place. And it's going to create this really complicated sort of weaving tree of passing around all of these values. And the React developers know that this is going to be really annoying. And so they provided us with a way to skip the passing it to the props object and then pulling it out of the props object and passing it to the props object of a child component and all the way down the tree. We don't have to do that. Instead, what we can do is we can use this really fancy useContext hook, which allows us to just say, I'm going to provide a single value everywhere in my application underneath this component. So what we do is we create a provider. So maybe I have like a cart context dot provider, and I give it a value. And this could be anything. This could be a string food. This could be a number, whatever you want. We're going to probably make this a little more complicated. And any child whether it's a direct child or a very far descendant of this provider, can very easily just pull the current value that this provider provides. And what the typical pattern is you will provide this value as an object where you have like your data, which is the thing you're trying to pass around and have access to in those child components. And then you can also pass along any other properties you want. And so we'll usually pass a property that contains all of these actions. So I can set data, which is some function that does something. And maybe I have clear data, which is another function that does something else, and so on and so forth. So we can pass a single object around that has the actual data we care about and also the actions that allow us to edit that data. And the really cool part is you don't have to take all of these things out in your child component. Let's say I had a child component inside this context provider somewhere really far down that only cares about setting my data. It doesn't even need to read what the current data is, which in this case, if I have my product table, which does not currently work because I broke it, but if I have my product table and I hit add, it doesn't need to know what's currently in the cart. It just needs to know what is the function that allows me to add something to my cart. And I'll let my provider take care of what the underlying implementation is. And so you can only take the actions or the properties from this that you want, and you can use them anywhere, and you don't have to pass them down a really extensive tree. There's lots of really cool things we can do with this. I think the two main use cases that I've seen are like theming information. So if you have a dark mode, you don't want to pass that to every single component in your page. Rather, you can provide just a context that just says, this component, you can easily grab whatever the current theme is. And based on that, you can adjust, what the component looks like or give it some different CSS styles or something like that.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So it has to be like value name dot provider for this to work.
Yeah, the syntax here, we haven't gotten into the exact syntax, but somewhere else we're going to create a new context and give it a default value. And then what you get back is like I don't know exactly how to describe it, but it's like a name reference to this particular context you're creating. So we're creating like a cart context, and the default value here is nothing. And this cart context, React.context of type null, because it doesn't know what the type is actually supposed to be. That's what goes in here. So we're providing a value of this context. We can create several different contexts. We can have several different providers of the same context, which provide different values. So one thing that you can do is you can like have a provider, and then you have some other element here or some other component. Maybe we have this be our page data, which is not a real component. And then we have another provider inside of here. This value that it's providing and the actions to update this value are going to be completely different from what's given by this provider. And any component that wants to get the data from a provider is going to find the closest one up the tree. So if I have something here, some component, and this component tries to get whatever the current cart context value is, it's going to find this provider and it's going to pull this value, which is this whole object, but really we care about this data. And then if I have an other component over here, and it also tries to get the value of whatever this current context is, it's going to find this provider instead, and it's going to get this value. So you can have multiple different instances of this context being provided in different places. I have not had a reason to do this yet. Typically, you'll have providers of different contexts. So maybe we have like a cart context, we have a theme context. And this is our light mode or dark mode. And then also another thing that people use context for is providing authentication. So when you log in, you can provide like a token that you get back from logging in anywhere to your application, so that anywhere that you need to make a request to a server, you have that token to send along with it. And so maybe we have create context, and this is just an empty string because we don't have a token yet. And so typically people have like 3 different providers, and they'll stack the providers inside of each other, but it's not the same context. Here we do theme context, and then inside of that we do the auth context. This is really messy. I'm not going to go any further with that. Is that kind of clear? I think that was more.
Kind of. So basically it like you said, it goes to the closest one, and then like, yeah, once you started like stacking providers inside of providers, I was getting a little bit lost. But what I can see, yeah, but what I can tell is that you create the variable first that has the use context, and then the provider is what set. It's basically like the provider is essentially like the use state setter, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, we're giving it like setter functions here. The other thing we're missing is that this here is not just going to be a hard-coded foo value. What we're going to do when we actually implement this is we're going to create like a component that has a state variable, and we can modify that state variable. And that component, or that, I guess it's not a component, it'll be just like a function or like a custom hook. It will give us these 3 things that we're providing. And so we can create multiple instances of that throughout our application in different providers. So this is not hard coded. This would be controlled by a state variable, and then these actions would update that state variable. And then each provider is a different instance of that state that can be edited by these actions. So yeah, you're on the right track. The other thing to remember is that this create context is not like creating a value explicitly. Create context is like describing to React that you want to have a new type of thing you're providing everywhere, but you don't like have an instance of that context until you provide it. So this is like templating to say, I'm going to have a context that is going to give me my current cart, and it's going to start as null. And then when you provide it, the very first time, it's not going to have a value. And so you're going to use this null. And then after that, once it gets initialized and run for the first time, then it's going to give an actual value here. But like, this is where the real magic happens. This is just declaring I'm going to have a value that I'm passing around my whole application. Just like,
And then just to confirm, for it to be able to touch the things that it needs to, all of them have to be inside that provider, like between the 2 tags.
yes, it will have to be a child, direct or indirect, but it has to be inside the tree of the provider. It can't be out here. If we put a component here and then try to access this context value, we're not going to get anything.
So essentially, it's basically a global value for those components that are inside of it.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. It means we don't have to pass it down a really complicated tree of components inside of components as a property, which is really annoying and error prone. Any other questions before we start writing some code? I think it'll be a little more clear when I'm not just like making some shit up off the top of my head.
I think you need to add the use thing, because isn't that why all those are airing out up there, the const? Because create context is not available in the import.
I think this is fine. I think these are telling me
Well, yeah, what is fast
is telling
refresh only
me-
works when the file has exports.
This is like Vite telling me that it's not going to be able to reload my application on the fly when I make changes. And this is telling me it's not used. We're gonna fix all this. I'm not worried about any of these right now. I'm gonna take them all out, in fact, just so we stop worrying about them. We'll go
Who be
back to
testing?
setting our router provider here.
Oh, I'm not muted.
No worries. All right, cool. Let's get going here. I don't want to waste too much more time or else we're gonna run out of time. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go into our utils section and we're gonna create this actual cart context. So we'll maybe call this cart.jsx. And we're going to start by just actually creating the context itself. So cart context equal to create context. And we're going to say the default value is null. So eventually we're going to pass around an object that has the items in our cart and also actions to update that cart. But this default value is if I try to access it under a position where there is no provider. So if my provider is right here, and I try and access from outside that provider, there's no value that it can find, and so it'll give me null instead, which is to indicate that it's, there's nothing there. And I'm cool with that. So null is going to be my default. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a function that it's a functional component, so not just a regular function. We'll maybe call this cart provider. And this component is going to actually like manage the state and then provide that state to any child components. So we're going to have to pass in some properties here. You'll remember, hopefully, that you can pass in a children property, which is sort of like a baked in property that allows you to say return, I don't know, some layout here, and then inside of that layout, we render all of our child components. And then now I can have another function that returns my cart provider. And then inside of my provider, I can actually like have the rest of my application. So I could create my homepage in here, and I could have, my other page in here as well. And this children property is going to be anything that is structured inside of my provider. And so that lets us have that pattern that we saw in the main when we were drawing out the example of all the components that want to access this provider go inside of it. And what we're going to do is we're going to add that provider. So if we go in here, cart context dot provider value is equal to something. We don't know what this is going to be quite yet. Actually, we do know it's going to be a JavaScript object, but we don't know what needs to go in the object yet. And then inside of this provider, we're going to render our children so that you can pass in any React elements and they will be inside of this cart context provider. And this is where we're going to actually add our cart state and all of our actions to update that cart. So let's say we have our cart set cart equal to use state, which is going to start as an empty array. And we said earlier that our cart would be an array of products. And our product definition from over here indicates that these are the properties that we have. So our product looks like this. We have an ID, which is an int. We have a name, which is a string. We have a seller, which is a string. We have a description, which is a string. We have an image, which is a string. And we have a price, which is a string. No, this is number. We'll just call it number since there's no differentiation between an integer and a non-integer in JavaScript. All right, so this is our product schema. This is what a product object looks like. The one thing to note here is that we don't have a quantity, which is something we said we're going to need in our main.jsx. So instead of being a product array, rather, I think we should create like another type. Let's call this like product in cart. And the schema for this is going to be product, which is a product matching down here. And then we can add extra metadata about this product that's not part of the actual like core information. So maybe we put the quantity in here, which is a number. And we could add some other stuff if we wanted to. All right, and then instead of being an array of products, we're going to make this an array of product in cart. I'm going to pull these out so we can reference them in the future, but they're not getting in the way. And we'll leave ourselves a reminder that this is an array of products in cart. Just going to start empty. All right, so we have one value that we can give. Maybe we can call this products. And we're going to give it the value of whatever's in our cart right now. And let's create one helper right now. And then we'll implement this cart provider and do some other stuff. And we'll come back if we have more time and do more actions. But one thing that we do need to have is we need to be able to add an item to our cart. So let's write that out. Add item to cart. Just to keep our terminology straight, let's do add product instead. Product. All right, so what are we going to do? We're going to search through this cart. We're going to see if we can find it already in our cart. If so, we're just going to increase the quantity. If it's not in there, then we're going to add it and set the quantity to 1. Sounds pretty simple. I hope it will be. And then once we're done, we're going to update the state here. All right, so let's do this. Let's search through our cart. So let I is equal to 0, I is less than cart.length, I plus plus. This product is equal to cart of I, and now we need to compare these. So remembering that these are the properties of a product, what should we use for this comparison to figure out if they're the same product? What should we try and compare from this list? Any thoughts?
The ID maybe?
Yeah, ID is always the safest option. We could try and compare all of them if we want to, but any of these could be duplicates between products. Only the ID is going to tell us uniquely if they're the same item. So let's do that. Let's compare our IDs. If this product, and remembering that this is a product in cart, so we're going to have to get the product property. .id is equal to new product ID. This is not yet a product in cart because the caller of this function, which is going to be that table that we have, it doesn't need to know how many things are already in the cart, and it doesn't have to associate a quantity with it. We just have to be able to add it. Actually, maybe we could add a quantity here. That way people can add like more than one thing at a time if they want. We can add that feature later, but I'm still not going to make it a product in cart because it's not in the cart yet. And so we'll keep these separate, even though those are the two properties here. So if the IDs are the same, then we found our thing. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to say this product dot quantity, add our input quantity, and then we're going to set carts to update our state. And remembering that this is an array, we have to create a new array for our state to properly like notify that it needs to re-render all the components. And so we're just going to take whatever's in the cart, which we edited here, and we're just gonna put it into a new array and then set our state. And so now it's going to cause this component to re-render. And similarly, any child components that actually pull this value from the context are also going to re-render. All right, this looks pretty good, but if we don't find it, then we need to still make sure we add the product. So if we get through this whole loop and we haven't found matching IDs, this is a return statement which says as soon as you find one, just exit. Down here, we assume that we didn't find it. And so let's do this. Set cart, whatever was in our cart plus a new product in cart, where our product is equal to new product and our quantity is equal to quantity. And so this matches our schema down here where we have a product and the actual object and then a quantity, which is a number. Cool little shorthand, if you haven't already come across this yet. If I have an object where I'm assigning it a property and a variable of the same name as the value, I don't have to actually do this. I can just do this, and it's going to stick this variable in this object, and the name of the property is going to be the name of the variable. So these are functionally equal. This is a cool little shorthand. All right, this action looks pretty good. If I were writing this code for my job, I would have to write a bunch of unit tests for this, which we will do either next week or the week after. I haven't yet decided. But we're going to skip that for now. And we have our action. We need to be able to call that action from anywhere. And so we're going to include that in our value. So add product to cart. Again, I don't really have a better name for this. And so I'm just going to make the name of the property of this object the same as the actual function. And so when I use this, I will try to pull this out. All right. So quick recap before we go any further. We create a new type of context for providing a cart of objects the user has saved. We create a component that manages this state that is provided across our application. And we're only going to create one instance. I mean, actually, that's not true. Anywhere we want to provide this context, we create a new instance of this component, which has a totally separate state. If I create 3 different cart provider components, they're all going to have independent state. And I can use them at various points in my application and have that hierarchy that we were talking about earlier, where it goes to the closest provider up the tree. So we have a state. We have an action that updates that state. I could, in theory, just instead of an action, let people set the cart to whatever they want, but this is very error prone. It's a much better idea to make sure that only the component that cares about this state knows how it can be changed. and to not expose this setter method to other components that might do whatever they want with it. You're going to run into problems where you're going to be like working in another component and you'll either be duplicating logic or you'll do something that you didn't think was going to be possible at the time that you wrote this component and created this state. And so it's going to break something else, some preconception that you had. If we only provide fixed actions, we can change the code inside this action whenever we want. We can change the underlying implementation as many times as we need, and we can't just set it to be whatever we want. Otherwise, I could accidentally set it in a child component to be the number 3, which is totally invalid. Questions here before we go any further? Cool. All right, let's go use this. So again, what we want to do is we want to have this provider and then all the children that need it inside. And we've extracted this to a component because it has its own state, but we're going to keep that same pattern. And instead of putting our pages inside of this cart context.provider, we're going to put all of our pages inside this cart provider, which is going to then put them inside of this cart context provider down here. So let's go do that. Let's go into our main page. All of our pages are inside this router provider, so might as well just put it on the outside. And this component is going to be our cart provider. What is it not like? I swear I'm importing this. It's not importing. Why is that? All right, let's try it again. All right, there we go. Put our browser router inside. And that's it. That's the whole thing. Our cart provider handles the state and the actions internally, and now anywhere in my application, I can access any of those actions or the cart itself, which is really cool. So I would say that because we added an action to add an item to the cart, let's start with our product table and use this context inside of that table. So what might be we'd be interested in doing? I'm thinking maybe we just add a button in here that says add to cart. And when we click it, it adds it to our cart. Just one. We don't have to have a quantity. We could maybe do that in the future. We could have a little like a text blank that says add 3. But I don't want to design that right now. My brain's fried. So let's do that. Let's figure out where this lives. I think this is going to be our product cell. I'm going to close out these things we're not using right now. We'll keep this cart open just so that we can reference it. Cool. So this is our product cell. Let's see if I can fix this CSS really quick. All right. I don't want to take too much time on this. All right, I'm gonna remove this for now, which does not currently work, and we'll just make this a generic container. And we don't need this use navigate hook, which is from our routing discussion a couple weeks ago. All right, cool. We're here. This component looks like garbage. We can, try and fix it in the future. Actually, this is really bothering me. I'm just gonna try and fix it now. So what's the actual problem here? We have a div, which is a container. and has display flex when it should not really. Styles.container display flex, just context start. Just gonna take these out. It'll look better. All right, cool. I can deal with that. All right, so let's go in. Let's add another button. Maybe we'll put it next to the image. No, I think that's going to be gross. Let's put it next to the H2. So put this in a container. And style here can be display flex, which will put them side by side. And then we add our button to cart. And we'll eventually add this item to our cart. All right. So what are we going to do? Well, we need to actually access the value in that context, which is where we call useContext. So this is the actual like hook part that React gives you. And it's really not wanting to import it for me, which is stupid. So I'll just do it myself because I know it's a thing. Use context. What context are we using? Well, if we go back into our cart.jsx here, we are using cart context, which needs to be exported. So this is a named export. And so I can import specifically this. And if I don't import anything by name, it's going to assume that it's that cart provider component. But now if I do cart context, it's also not going to like that. Why is it not like that? I think it's. Oh, well, I'm pretty sure it's going to work. If it doesn't, it'll be a learning experience. And let's figure out, how do I actually get back to that file? Well, I need to go up one level, up 2 levels, and then I can go into utils and get cart. And remember that this gets the value provided. So it gives me this object, which has my data and the actions. And so a common pattern is to destructure this value object and just pull out the things you want. So I want my products and I want add product to cart, which should be those 2 things that we gave. Yeah, there's a products property, which matches right here, and then add product to cart, which matches right here. Cool, and so now I have access to both of those inside this component, and I can do whatever I want. I don't actually need this product, so I'm going to get rid of that. All I need is this action, and when this button is clicked, I'm going to run a function. This function is just going to add product to cart, product, and 1. So this is the actual data that is being rendered, the object, and we're going to add 1 of them. All right. If I go in here, I might find that this works. I'm not getting any errors, which is pretty good, but I also have no idea if it's working because there's no visual indicator anywhere. So we probably want to fix that. Really quick, just throw some styles on here to make it look a little better. Height of 50 pixels. Width 120. And it's margin left. Let's give it like 20 pixels of space. All right, that's a little big. Make it a little smaller. 30 by 100. Well, not lined up perfectly. We'll figure that out later. And let's just to prove that we can do it, let's copy this and let's go into our home page. And here we will use context on our cart context. And here it's going to let me auto import. I don't know why the other one wasn't. And here we'll just get all the products that are currently in our list. And we'll just actually, no, we'll remove all this garbage here. And we'll add something useful. We have products. This will be the length of whatever is in that array. We'll print out the whole thing. Cool. So if I refresh, I can add a bunch of things into my cart. Doesn't show us anything immediately, but if I go to my homepage, we're going to see we have 3 products in our cart because we click the button on 3 different things. And then if we go in here, we're going to see that they all have a different quantity because I clicked the button a different number of times. So for the water bottle, I clicked it 9 times since the quantity is 9. And then here, I clicked it twice. I can go back in my products. Let's go down to that water bottle, click it a few more times. Go back to our homepage. We still have 3 items. And now we have 24 of these water bottles.
You don't want to sleep? Awesome.
Any questions about what we did? The next steps here would be like we create a component that can go into navbar that's just like a little icon for how many things we have in our cart. Maybe we create a page where you click that, it takes you to a new route. And that would also listen into the context and would say, like we'd grab the whole array out and then we put like the number inside that little component. And in the page, we would grab the whole thing and any actions we add. So maybe that's where we need to update or remove the quantity or clear out the whole thing, stuff like that. But this is a lot to throw at you. So first steps first, if you have any questions, go for it. All right. Any questions just about like, what's the point of a context? Anything that we said earlier that still doesn't really make sense? Or any questions about something tangential or completely unrelated? I got about 7 minutes. I don't really want to start anything else. So I'm just available for as long as necessary.
Could you? I'd like to review this. So, where do you post your links in Slack?
I will post them in this announcement. I'll just put a reply in here with some links to the documentation, which I can actually go grab right now before I forget.
Thank you.
And the recording, I will probably upload like right after this, and it'll be ready in maybe like 30 minutes. If you have access to the recording dashboard, I don't know exactly where the link is, but that would be the best place to re-review this session. And then like if you have any specific questions, you can follow up from there.
Thank you.
Yeah. highly, highly, highly recommend like the generic React reference guide for any of their hooks. I think they do an awesome job of putting together like really good examples and talking about like why you care about these hooks. I think like of all the documentation I've read for libraries I've used, React has like some of the best. So definitely start there. And then I also put a link in here, which I will post along with everything else, of sort of the same thing we did here, but as applied to authentication. So in that case, what you'd be doing is you'd say, well, the user can log in from one page, and then we're going to save their credentials or like the token we get back to authenticate them, and then we provide that token across our whole page. That's a very, very common use case. And if you're working on any serious application, you probably will want to create exactly that.
Thank you.
Hi, Lee, I have a quick question. Will you be pushing this part, this like the one that you code to your GitHub? The one
Yeah.
that you
I can
yeah.
push whatever all the stuff we have right now since it's in a working state. I'll also do that right now.
Great, thank you.
So this is 12/2024 part context. Just 2 parts. Throw this in the links as well. All right, I will post all of this shortly after we jump off. If there's any other questions, feel free to stick around. Otherwise, have a great week. Make sure you fill out the sign-in form before you go, just so I can record that you were here. And I'll catch you guys next week. I don't know exactly what we'll do. I think we have 2 more weeks of content, and next week has interesting stuff and the last week does not. So I think one of the weeks we'll probably talk about TypeScript, and then the other week we'll just talk about testing, which I think are both really important. So one next week, haven't decided. All right, have a good weekend, everyone. Talk to you guys next Thursday.
Thank you. See you around.